Risk management for dummies. How hard can it be? It's a bit unfair, isn't it? I don't know why I came up with that title. It just seemed like a good idea. But when I wrote it, I did put these slides together yesterday too. So apologies for that. But I did feel a bit silly because yesterday's conversation reminded me how not dummy you all are. So I had to change that and focus on your roles. So a little introduction. My name's Earl Gilbert Purchase. Hopefully a few of you have seen me around. And I'm currently performing a role within the SCA of the Deputy Kingdom Seneschal Risk. In my professional life, I'm an OHS consultant, health and safety, work health and safety, whatever you want to call it. And those two roles are very closely aligned. So while I was preparing the slides today, I might have borrowed some of my work content, but I'm reminded to try and not slip into that professional face. So it's good to reflect on my role in the SCA. So as many of you are aware, I'm the last Baron to step down from the role, hooray. I've been King some years ago, been a Seneschal. Some of you may not know that at the baronial level, and a Marshal before that. They were roles that I really enjoyed. And that's perhaps more like the kind of function you've seen me in at our events. I do like to get into fighting. So some of you might know that. And I certainly enjoy a little bit of fencing when the opportunity presents. Also like to do some marshalling. And one of my projects has been to take war numbers every festival to keep track of how many people are getting out on the war field. But you might be able to sense that I'm a little bit obsessed about risk. I love risk. So the opportunity to come and talk to you today is just something I really treasure. And I don't just love risk in an SCA context. I've done a little bit of karate over the years. Probably hard to tell what that is. It's a starfish on my back whilst scuba diving. I am one of the few scuba divers that's proud to say I've kicked a shark in the head. Haven't been scubaing too much since that moment, but I do want to get back into it. I don't mind cars. I seem to break them more than drive them, but I don't mind getting my hands dirty either into a bit of cars, but certainly teaches you the importance of, you know, brakes. And I love snowboarding. It's probably my favorite thing, but geez, it's expensive. So before I go too much further, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land I'm at, and I acknowledge all those lands that you're on as well, because I wish to recognise the continuing connection to the land, water and community. The lands I'm on were a beautiful forest not so long ago, now covered in houses. But I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. So today, I'd like you to feel like you've got an understanding of the concept of risk management, the theory, if you will. Yeah, pop your people's nations in the chat if you know it. That's lovely. So understand the concept of risk management. What's all that about? I'm sure you've heard the term. Let's see if I can unpack it. And really, I'd like you to start thinking about how risk management could be supporting your role. And that's perhaps a little bit trickier. We'll see how we go. So how are we going to do that? Well, I guess the first question is, what's all this risk management business? Then I'm going to talk you through how to identify hazards and threats, analyze those and determine what the risk is. Evaluate that. What does that mean? We'll come back to that idea. Treat it. Yeah, band-aids, that sort of stuff. But first, let's really think about what risk management means. What's this word risk? It's not the board game, although the board game certainly teaches you a little bit about risk. Let's start first by thinking, what are threats? Threats are any situation that can affect the ability of the organisation to fulfil its objectives. So we've got hazard threats. These are threats to people and their assets. We've got financial threats. This is threats to access to capital. Often we think it's losing money. It's not just losing money, it's also losing the ability to gain access to money. And it's a whole profession that I try not to get too involved in because it's very complicated. And last, but by no means least, systemic risks. These have all sorts of labels and names. There is no one name because this is the everything else bucket. Until we work out a name for this, we're just going to go with systemic. But it's really anything that could stop us from achieving our objectives, be it a reputational damage, some sort of legislated obligation, some sort of internal process, or even an external pressure. It's important to note a lot of these we don't have a lot of control over. They just happen and we just have to be ready. Okay. So I have here the mind of a risk manager. And I wonder if you'd like to peer inside it. I wonder if you've ever thought to yourself, I wonder what goes through a risk manager's head when they look at the world every day. Let's have a look together. There's a link there, and what I'm going to do now is just share it in the chat so you don't have to type that in. Oh, I've done a bad, hang on, whoops. Excuse me. One moment, please. I've done a very bad thing. Put that there, okay. Okay, and here we are. There's the thread. Okay, click on that link. So people often ask when I talk about risk in the SCA, you know, what sort of stuff is a risk to us? What do we care about? And particularly what's a threat? And this document here is a little bit of a brain dump of mine in an evening one day, just idly thinking about, I wonder what risks matter to the SCA. This is not an endorsed document. This is not some substantial body of work that's my pride and joy. It's actually a document I had lying around from 2017. And I thought, hey, why don't I just show you? This is the kind of thing that flows through my mind at every event. And when I'm smiling at you and I'm sort of looking out the corner of my eye, it's probably something on this list that's got my attention and I'm pondering it. And that's important. We'll come back to that idea. I'm not rushing to stop what they're doing. I'm just pondering what is the risk and how is it presenting right now? Risk managers don't like to get involved. Often it's the last thing we want to do. We just want to watch and understand. Why are you doing that? That looks like a bad idea. I must be missing something. Every now and then, no, that was a bad idea. So what are the sorts of groupings? We talked about those hazards. I'll just make that a little bit bigger so we can see there. We're talking about those hazards. So there's the health. You can see physical. That's the one everyone thinks of first with risk management. They jump to this list and they go, there's risk management. I'm spending increasingly time up here in the psychological space. I'm working on a very interesting project in the university to better describe these risks. I don't like any of the words in there. We're trying to do better. Health, pretty accessible. Assets, theft, damage, you know, often drifts into financial, but this is individual loss rather than organizational loss. When we talk about financial, whoa, what a big list. And this is just a tiny drop in the ocean of what our poor financial guys have to think about. To your Reeves out there, I'm never taking on the role, okay? That would be a disaster. I'm very impressed that you managed to keep it all together. You can have a look through there and think about words like cronyism and nepotism. What do they mean and why do we care? You know, failment to lodge, payment to ASIC, what's that all about? Yeah, gets messy and ugly. Theft, money stolen, does happen. Okay, and then assets. We own assets. Where are those assets? Well, there's a frickin' trailer in my carport, so I know all about SCA assets. Do we look after them? We do generally. Liability, contingency planning. This is a whole field. This is a massive space now. I'm not even going to touch it. And then we come into this operational strategic risks. This list here I'm deeply unsatisfied with, but it was my first pass on it. So I come back to it every now and then and I get all excited and start changing it. And I think, oh, no, actually it's not worth it. So you can have a look through there in your own time at some of the things that have popped into my mind. But please don't think of that as an exhaustive list. It's certainly not. All right. Oh, what's happened there? Oh, you silly thing. There we go. So that's what it looks like inside a risk manager's brain. Kind of a scary place, I suppose, but it's where I like to be. So you can let me do that and you can just enjoy the event. But if you want to get more interested in it, it's amazing what discoveries you can make. So next, I guess we have to answer this question. What are risks? Well, first I want to distinguish a word from risk, and that's the idea of a threat. When we talk about safety, the first thing that we think of is hazards. Hazards are safety concerns, and I mentioned kicking a shark in the head. A hazard is something that has the potential to harm you. So that shark, I'd pretty confidently put into that bucket. Risk, though, is the likelihood of a particular form of harm occurring. Okay, so in the case of the shark, the fact that I was able to kick a 7-foot, 7-gill shark in the nose tells you that the risk might have been quite high. Whereas if I just observed that fish, as I did about 2 hours earlier, the risk would be very low, and people even overestimate the risk when it's not there and underestimate it when it is. So understanding that connection is quite important. There's a whole hour of chat in there I'm not going to go into. So here's some examples of where hazards turn into risks. You can have a look at that and think about that. Water, jumping into the water, gasoline, putting a flame near it, driving while texting. Risk is the more complicated space. We have to think about its context. So imagine, if you will, that you're suddenly teleported to Rowaney Festival, and as you lap up the atmosphere, what activities and interactions might interfere with your enjoyment? Those are probably risks. What about somebody else's enjoyment? Do you think about that? Well, when should we be thinking about it? I'd like to put to you that now's a good time. Maybe not at the event, it might be too late. So when do these risks emerge? I was going to do this as an activity, but conscious of time, I'm just going to give you all the answers. But type in the chat something that just comes to mind now, that when should we be thinking about risk? When do they emerge? I'll go with the first round. There's alcohol. Okay, so we're drinking alcohol. I wonder where. I was drinking alcohol last night. Is that on the list? Probably not. Anyone else? Social media. Boom. Boom. Fighting fires. We've got in the zone now. Renewing insurance. Whoa, we got some financials in the room. Leave me alone. Gas bottles. Beautiful. You got the idea. Here's my thoughts. So fighting was the first thing that sprung to my mind. It's the most obvious because look, we're trying to hurt each other, right? Wrong. Trying to have fun. Here's a little video from my college. This is Monash University, and that's my atrocious voice in the background. And you can see we're practicing fighting in a public space. Before you panic, I'm also the risk manager for every single aspect of the control of that. So that makes it safe, right? And you can see that they're doing controlled activities, but also in an environment that has additional threats. Here's Matt, just ignorant of the fact that there's someone right next to him fighting. So where do these risks emerge? We need to think about the dynamics of that. Of course, those things don't happen just by themselves. They happen in the context of events. So I've got some pictures to sort of jot your mind. And the one at the top left, I'll draw your attention to. That's where B's calling them activities. I don't really like it. I want to get a bit more legitimate about those things. But we take our SCA home, don't we? And we play with our friends there. Is that SCA? Let's have a long argument about that later. We talked about money. What about that symbol? Who knows what that is? Pain. I'll pay it.
Square.
Square. What about that? Who knows what that is?
A nightmare.
Anyone that's done lists will know that. What about that? Membership form. Where's risks coming from that? Email account? Well, what's that got to do with risk, you're wondering? Website? Surely that's got nothing to do with risk. Oh, here's a quick Google search of Craig Glass. What does that reveal? Oh, somebody's mobile phone number. That's interesting. I wonder if that was intentional. So information that we share, whether it's financial or personal, there's risks. I think you're suddenly going, oh yeah, those ones. What about that symbol? Some of you might recognize it. Or that one? I hope you recognize that one. Surely you recognize that one. And perhaps you recognize what that is. Risks emerge, risks change. The ones on the right-hand side I'd put to you are the more new kids on the block. The ones on the left are the ones we're familiar with. But risks span everything that we do, be it a chat, be it this presentation right now, be it me clocking someone on the head with a piece of wood. Hopefully that gives you some confidence of what the risks are that we need to be thinking about. Okay, so said I'd explain to you what risk management is. Let's give that a crack. How hard can it be? Risk management is a theory, everybody, a little bit like gravity. It's a theory that's pretty well established now. There's not too many people that argue that this theory isn't helpful. but it's by no means flawless. And it can be taken out of context and used for horrific purposes. So we need to be very cognizant that it's an idea, and that idea helps us. It is not, it is not the be all and end all. And hopefully policy enables us to think about how we're approaching those theories. What's our needs as an organization? And procedure then tells us how we're going to act on that. What's the actual steps that we're going to follow to enact our policy? And so this is called a document hierarchy, and some of you in management-y type positions will be familiar with these things. I firmly believe in them, and I would suggest that it's something we need to think more about in terms of risk. What does it look like in the SCA? Well, I've got good news. The theory's done for us. Here it is, 31,000. You can access it, I'm pretty sure. If you can't, I'll happily send you a PDF copy of it. Excellent reading for your Monday night, just before bedtime. But I'll do you a service and I'll do my best to explain it in a slightly more engaging way than what's in there. But it's a whole lot of information that tells you what to do to manage risk. Simple. What about policy? Well, you're probably familiar that a document got circulated that I haven't finished yet, called a risk management policy. Here I am trying to enact some direction and goals around this idea of risk management. But we also have other policies out there that fit very closely with risk. I'm sure some of you can type some of those examples in the chat, and Clara will take notes of the ones you've missed, and she'll take that back to the board and say they still don't help us overreach. Wow, I don't think we have a policy on that yet, Bart. You know, there's lots of, oh, you're still identifying risks. Oh, you're right into that, cool. Yeah, there's lots of policy out there. I'm very enthusiastic about us putting some more policy in there. But you might recall if you're in the session yesterday, I don't like documents in and of themselves, and policy really suffers from that. Policy ends up just being some wonderful statement that nobody knows about, no one cares about. So we have to do more than policy. We have to put it into practice. Good news, everyone. We've been doing that pretty much since the start of time. The Fighter's Handbook is a beautiful example of procedure. Maybe I've overstated it. I can think of a lot of ways to improve it. But, you know, when I think about the SCA and I think about good procedure, I turn to that one as a classic example. If a fighter can understand it, even with their helmet on, we've done all right, yeah? What else have we got? Well, we've got this thing called the SCA Limited Financial Policy. Well, what's that doing there, I wonder? Well, if you read that document, you'll find it's not a policy at all. 99% of that is actually procedure. This is how we move money. This is how we control money. So we need to be very clear, I think, about some of that. But we do have very good binding procedures. You know, shout outs to Clara for trying to keep on top of all that. What a tricky thing. What about Lochac laws? What are they there for? Surely there's some procedure in there, right? Surely when we use the word law, we're talking about procedure. Surely it's not policy. Surely it's telling us what to do, right? Well, if you do a quick search inside that document for words like risk, you're going to be disappointed. So maybe we need to start embedding risk more deeply into all of what we do. I'll come back to where we go after procedure. By no means is procedure the be all and end all. So I've talked a lot about risk, and hopefully you've seen a little bit of how it joins into our organization. But you should probably be asking yourself about now, so why do I care about this? It's a good question. I've got some pictures maybe to help you come up with an answer to that question. Why should we manage risks? And I think there is one gesture above and beyond all else that I commonly associate with risk management. And it often involves a face and it often involves a palm. And as soon as you find yourself doing that, you probably could have been using risk management better. So why do we risk manage? Because frankly, it's common sense, everyone. I'm telling you that we should be using our common sense. If we just relied on common sense, we'd be in trouble, wouldn't we? Because many of you will know the old expression, there is no such thing as common sense. It's a little bit like the law of averages. When you break it down and interrogate, there's some really interesting studies on this if you're interested. There is no average position. There's clumps around the average. So when we talk about American politics, the average might be slightly right of center, or perhaps it's moving fast right of center. But if you interrogate people, very few people sit on the average. They sit at either end of it, yeah? So common sense is the average. When you go and interrogate people, you don't see it. You see different behavior. Why is that? Need more risk management. So I mentioned that I would try and explain the risk management standard to you. Here we go. There it is. That's what the standard has to say. And I'll be honest, I've refined a bit of that language because it's even more wordy than that. And if you're trying to understand that right now and go, what does facilitate continual improvement of the organization mean? Check it out. This is what risk managers do. They put it into actual words. So hopefully this is a list that makes a bit more sense. Risk management saves money. That's always a good reason, isn't it? Also makes money, by the way. It improves decision making. It makes us confident in what we need to do and what we shouldn't be doing. And it enables us to then do so with a real sense of need. It avoids fear. Who thinks that when we talk about risk in the SCA, the word fear applies? I certainly do. And reaction, that one really bugs me. Why are we so reactive? Why can't we be a little bit more proactive and a little bit more thoughtful? And this is so important in the standard that it bangs on about it twice. So it says, and it does it really well. So I've just put thoroughly in there. It's defensible. What do I mean by defensible? Yeah. I get to deal a lot with our legal team in my professional context because we give our lawyers the ammunition they need to rock up into court and say, Your Honour, this person is a numpty. Doesn't always work, but it's good when it does, I can assure you. It reduces subjectivity. What do I mean by that? I mean, it reduces our reliance on each individual's experience and thought and enables us as an organization to be more objective. And that brings us closer to that common sense perspective. It doesn't delegitimize subjectivity. In fact, it embraces it and says, let's value everyone's subjective position, bring it all together, and then try and facilitate the middle ground. And so the next dot point flows so beautifully to that. It just naturally brings people together, and people are social. You'll hear me talk about this a lot. So when we create opportunities for people to come together, they're going to be happy. There are exceptions. That's a whole separate session. And it enables us to keep up with the times. Now, it might sound funny for a group that's focused on whatever we're up to now, 16, 17, I don't know. But we're anachronists. We recognize we're out of time. So we should be keeping up with the time. A long argument about should list keepers do everything on paper because that's how it was done. Well, if a list keeper wants to do it all on paper or stone tablet, be my guest. But for me, I like fighting. So save time with that, get a digital tool so we can spend more time doing the fun parts of medieval and less time on the gruesome and challenging parts. But always a time and a place to explore those times as well. It's not a dichotomy, it's just a spectrum. And it makes us get better at what we do. And shouldn't we be aiming for that? That's that word, continual improvement. Shouldn't the SCA want to be better? Should I even have to tell you? No, of course we should be. So hopefully that makes you feel a little bit like risk management's something we should be doing. If not, I'm in trouble for the rest of this presentation. And I was going to do more activities, but I don't have time. So put in the text if you think I'm talking nonsense so that I can abort now. So the last question, how? How do we manage risk? Well, you saw some insight earlier and you've seen that standard popping up time and time again. How does this standard work? Because that looks really weird and doesn't really tell you anything. Well, it's not so scary. This box over here, this blue box, and by the way, they call me Mr. Squiggle at work. This box here is all about what things we need to put in place for it to work. So it's like the engine of the car and the brakes. It's the mechanics, yeah? And this, whoops, clear that one. This box, it's being difficult with me here, is all about, oh, and sorry, I didn't have my, it's going to pop up later, it's out of sync. The box in the middle, like I've got this tool here. This one here is all about what makes us want to do it. And we use the word here, value. It's the value. If there's no value, well, the rest doesn't matter, right? It's not valuable. So it's got to be valuable. How do we ensure that we've got that value? These are those terms that I covered earlier in common language. And then we press on and we say, well, okay, if we know it's important and we've got the structure to do it, what then is it? Jib, stop crapping on and just tell us. Okay, let's get into risk management 101. First, we need to understand, what are we doing? Often I ask why. It's not the most important question, but it's a good one. Then we need to think about what are the threats that emerge as a result of that? Simple, right? Then we need to analyze those risks. What are the characteristics of that? And there's a word that emerges here that scares the pants off everyone, which is its level of impact. We'll come back to that idea, but don't be frightened of that. It's not the most important part of risk management. And then we need to evaluate it. And I think the word evaluation is not an accessible piece of language, so I much prefer to talk about risk acceptance. Is a risk acceptable? People understand that word much better. So if I were to say to you that I want to do a fighting activity, it's going to be great and all the fighters are going to love it. And what I want to do is I want to simulate maritime war. So what's happened is that the boat has started to sink and the water level's coming up through the boat. And this scenario is about fighting when you're waist deep in water. Would you accept the level of risk that that's okay to go ahead? Or would you say that sounds unacceptable? Well, I'm going to answer that question for you, but you can type in the chat now. Yeah, good point. Believe it or not, I jumped into the little creek thing at Canterbury Fair a few years ago, and my armour never forgave me for that. I had to go and re-rivet everything, but it was so totally worth it. And everyone thought you jump into a creek with armour on, you're going to sink to the bottom, right? I could swim in it. Isn't that interesting? I didn't know that. Probably should have known that before I jumped in, but you know, sometimes you got to live life dangerously. No pain, no gain, right? So, you know, can I envisage a scenario where we can do a fighting situation literally up to our waists in water? And the answer is yes, of course I can. I'm thinking straight away about all the infrastructure that I need to do it safely. And the first thing I think of, which may in fact be the last thing you think of, is we should have someone trained from the Royal Lifesavers for Australia. I think New Zealand has an equivalent process. We should have someone certified as a lifeguard present. Now, if I have a lifeguard present and I pose that scenario and you knew that there was a lifeguard standing there the whole time, would you suddenly accept the risk? I suspect suddenly your anxiety levels are plummeting and you're thinking, well, they're going to say, no, you can't do it. Okay. I can tell you now that I could definitely set it up where I am very confident that the average person would say the risk level is acceptable. Do I want to? No, it's a hypothetical. But that's the idea of risk management. So often when we're thinking about this evaluation, people hear risk management and think we're the no people. People think the risk manager is the one in the room that's trying to squash all the fun. Get the risk manager out of here so we can get on with the fun. More data required, absolutely, data, data, data. I see my role as the complete opposite, everyone. I like to get involved when someone's saying, and to Borders War, hey, shout outs to the last activities there. Oh, let's set up a fort that we can stand on and shoot arrows from. My first thought is, awesome. Then my brain goes, okay, what would we actually need to do that safely? Okay, well, first up, technically you're constructing something. So we're going to need to make sure that that's in some way certified. We're going to need to think about how to stop someone falling off it. So it's going to need to be certified to something that's designed for people. And it's got to be durable enough, because I've been in plenty of wars, that it can take some serious turbulence at its foundations. But if you put all of that in, oh, and maybe we should avoid scratches and scrapes, but I mean, hey, we're all in armor, right? If we put all of that in place, then yes, by gosh, we can do it. And I reckon that's going to be fun. And last border war was awesomely fun. I had a great time with the fort. The scenarios were great. And just having that novelty suddenly gave a new perspective on fighting that I hadn't felt in some time. So that's what I'm all about. I want to make things happen, all right? Send me your scariest, craziest idea, and the most likely response you get from me is, awesome! Few questions. More data required. Thanks, Clara. And then we come to treatment. Okay, so if it's not acceptable, what are we going to do about it? We'll come back to those ideas. So here's where we head into the real nitty-gritty. Got about 10 minutes to do this. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to set you up as expert risk managers. That's not my goal. My goal is simply to get you thinking about this process, okay? So I've kept it very brief. So how do we identify a threat? Hopefully in this picture you can sense a threat somewhere. I wonder if the first thing that you see is in fact the water. I suspect most people would see the fire. My first thought is the water. The water is much more dangerous than the fire in that picture. but you see the fire, yeah? Nod if you saw the fire first and went, fire! Yeah, so think about that. Okay, where's the threat? It's not always the first thing you see, okay? In fact, often the one that you really got to worry about is the last one you see, because that's the one you've done the least work on. Well, how hard can it be? First, we ask ourselves, what are we doing? Why is there a fire here? I don't know. It was a cool background, all right? And, okay, if we are here, what could possibly go wrong? Yeah, there is some ice and snow up the top right. You're quite right. And landslide as well. What could possibly go wrong in this scenario? All right, well, if we focus on the fire, we'd be thinking about some burnt fingers. That's probably about as serious as we get. Is that really a big deal? Well, if you stand around some parents, you'd think that they're just going to spontaneously combust. My experience is when you let kids near fire, they learn very quickly that it burns, and then they don't want to be anywhere near it. And it's actually about encouraging them back to the fire and doing it safely. So once again, we've got to look at this from a real lens of where is the real threat? Whereas while our attention's turned on that fire and that child's there and they've just run away because they've burnt their finger, where are they likely to go and play? Uh-oh, how cold's that water, I wonder? How slippery is that surface? Here's our common sense. Here I'm applying some common sense to this picture. You can come up with different ideas, I'm sure. Maybe you disagree with my common sense. That's quite okay. I can live with that. But we've already identified common sense isn't a good option, is it? So we need more. And that's where processes come in. And processes aren't just the only thing. Procedures are the documented form of processes. And I guess to a certain degree, I can tick that one. We have those, so that's all right. But that's not the end of the journey. And we're talking a little bit about this yesterday. Look at those other things there: training, incident reports, risk assessment, audits. Are they embedded in what we do? I suspect you might be shaking your head like me. We don't do those things, and maybe we should, because that helps us identify threats. Risk analysis. Okay, analysis, scary word, right? Ooh, analysis. I was going to put a big monster on this, but I thought better of it. So what could happen? We've got that fire. What could possibly happen? We talked about it earlier. You know, burn. We could set fire to the forest. We could give ourselves carbon monoxide poisoning. We could set fire to our tent while we're sleeping. We could burn too much wood, get in trouble. It might not be legal to have a fire there. Well, lots of things could happen that aren't good, right? I wonder if those are all things that popped into your mind. I wonder if you've got other ideas. Chuck them in the chat. Well, how bad could it be? What's the worst that could happen in each one of those scenarios? So the direct cause there, that fire, as I said, well, worst thing that could happen is a burnt finger, big deal. What about that is not a legal fire? Oh dear, now I'm going to get wrapped on the knuckles, but maybe there's a fine. Maybe I'm going to be asked never to come back to this gorgeous place. That would be a disaster, wouldn't it? That would be far more impactful to me. If it was Australia and we set fire to our forest, oh my goodness, now we're talking about threats to lives and assets far beyond the capacity for the SCA to cope. This is now catastrophic. How bad can it be? It's a good question to ask, isn't it? We don't ask that question enough. Sometimes we focus on the good stuff and we don't spend enough time on the bad. So that's where risk managers come in. We come in and we do all that hard work for you and we say, oh, have you thought about this? And if you say no, we don't panic. We don't go, oh, we're going to die. We say, oh, well, can we? Pretty easy question. So often when we do that, we find that there's lots of stuff already in place. Yes, I've got my water bucket over here. And actually, I've got a fire extinguisher over there. And I've told everyone that we're doing the fire. And I've got my council approval to do it. And it's the middle of winter. Nothing's going to catch on fire. What are you worried about? And that water, there is a strict no limits set on the water, especially when children are involved. Whoa, suddenly I feel a lot better about this scenario, right? So you've really got to take time to go, what's already there? We often gloss over that and assume there's nothing. It's a jolly good idea to make sure of that before you rush off to start fixing things, because you're doing something called assume. And I'd put the Benny Hill theme on right now, because there's a classic line in that: never assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. So risk managers hate assuming. We always actually assume everything's in place and fine, or at least good ones. And then we like to be proven others. We come in with a, hey, show me how awesome you are at this. And then we point out, oh, could do a little bit better here, I suppose. And oh, could do a little bit better there. If I can't find anything to improve, I'm disappointed in myself because I couldn't help you do it better. I'll go away and think about that and come back 2 days later and go, actually, I have thought of one thing. And if you've ever dealt with risk managers in a professional context, it can get a bit frustrating that you have the perfect process. They'll still find something. Oh, you didn't put a version number on that document. Throw the couch at me. But that's what we do. That's our job. We try and find those things. If we didn't do it, we're not doing our job, and you should be disappointed. It's a crap service. So then we get into this nasty word, risk analysis. Dun, dun, dun. And we use the word matrix. People freak out. You know what? You know what a matrix is? It's colors. That's it. It's colors. Choose your favorite color. All right. These are loathed and detested in industry now because they're really like a game, and people try to game the color down to green because I think that's what we want. Risk managers love red. We love it. That gives us something to do. That gives us a job. But everyone thinks, oh, if we make it green, they'll be happy and they'll leave us alone. And then someone gets hurt. We're not happy. We're not happy. We just want to know what you're actually doing. So analysis is just about being honest and saying, look, something could go wrong here. I really think so. And that gives an opportunity for someone to come in and try and help with that. And you might be aware that in the background in COVID-19, that's a big part of what I'm doing, is just trying to provide that stabilization to say, look, it sounds bad, but it's actually here. Or vice versa, we should stop doing that about now. But it's not my call. You got to understand that. That's the Seneschal's role and the board's role to make the judgment. So of course, risk evaluation. Is the level of risk acceptable? Yes, it is. No, it isn't. It is that simple, everyone. Hey, it sounds scary to talk about risk evaluation. All we're doing is going, yes, okay. Or no. And the degree to which you feel either yes or no is your evaluation. It's the outcome of your evaluation. If you're really solidly yes, let's do it. If you're really solidly no, let's not do it. If you're somewhere in the middle, let's have a chat, because it might be that we should do it or we shouldn't do it. That's what we're trying to accomplish here. And I suppose the really important part of that is, well, who gets to be the call? Who gets to be the judge? Who's the final say? If you don't know who that is, we have a big problem, because it doesn't matter who's doing the evaluation. If the wrong person's doing it, you've just got a yes from someone that's not accountable. It's meaningless. It's like me giving you Monopoly money. You go to the shops and pay with that, they're going to look at you like you're crazy. Oh, but it says $100. Yeah, that's Monopoly money. That's not real. So it has to come from a legitimate and authoritative space. And I think we could do more here to hold ourselves to account and to say, I make the call. We were talking about event managers yesterday. I'm accountable. Everything that happens here, that's on me. You need to understand that. So everything that's happening right now is because I want it to happen. And if I decide I no longer want it to happen, then I'm going to tell you. But right now, everyone should be having fun because I'm having fun. Yeah. Similarly, when we talk about a pandemic, who gets to be the judge of whether you're at an event or not? Well, we've actually escalated right up to our legislators, up to our regulators. We've passed around. This is a pandemic, everyone. Holy moly, we don't know what to do. You might remember at the start of the pandemic, a call was made to just stop all the events prior to any regulator stepping in. You might recall that. And yes, I was quite involved in the background, whispering quite loudly that, hey, I don't think the risk that they're talking about is consistent with the risk that's actually out there right now. Now is a good time to stop, stabilize, assess. If I'm wrong, we'll get straight back into it. But if I'm right, this might stop someone from getting really hurt. Yeah, not a nice place to be. Okay, so if you don't want to be accountable, don't put your hand up. I don't want to be an event manager. That means I have to decide if someone gets hurt. Yeah, it's important. But if you believe that that's the position for you and you can do it, then risk management just gives you the tools to recognize you've done the right thing. And thinking about Victoria at the moment, such a terrible decision to make about, can people leave their house after 8 o'clock? I mean, crikey, who would have thought we'd be making decisions like that? But, you know, a lot of the support for Dan Andrews and every poll, they all try to game it, but they just consistently keep smashing the polls because people can see that he's doing it for us. He's doing it because he believes that this is what's going to get us to the best point. Yeah, it's not always going to be perfect. Things are going to slip through the cracks and that's going to suck. But as long as we're armed with the information and we believe we're doing the right thing, we probably are. Think about that in the context of what you do. A quick thing on risk perception, because people really don't understand this, and I love to show people just how flaky perception is. So here's a chart, and it's got some different risks. And you can see, here's an airplane crash, and you can see on the top the perceived risk. That's what people think, okay? If you go out into the workplace and you poll them, the top circle is what they'll tell you. And this was done in 2008, so it shifted, all right? But it still remains one of my favorite charts. And down the bottom, actual risk, that's been scientifically deduced using some very authoritative and careful processes, which I won't bore you with. Have a look at the difference in some of those things. Airplane, you ask someone, are you scared of going on an airplane? Oh yeah, the risk is not there. If you ask someone, are you scared of going outside? I would be going outside. Yet skin cancer remains one of the deadliest things. And what about heat waves? Look at that. You know, people have no concern for the fact that it's 40 degrees, perhaps because they feel like they have no control over it. Yet Clara, I'm sure, will attest that the impact of those things, not just to humans, but to animals, is fantastic to comprehend. So we don't do very well at perceiving risk. And I've got this little thing to show you. I'm going to play it out because I think this is powerful.
So last year, 213 people died on our roads. What do you think would be a more acceptable number?
Acceptable 70 maybe, probably 70.
Can you turn 70? Actually, this is what 70 people looks like. So now, what do you think would be a more acceptable number?
0. 0.
Sorry to dump that one on you, but I think sometimes in these presentations we get a bit caught up in the theory and we forget that there's a reality behind that theory. There's real consequence to what we do. It's still, every time I've seen that video, I've lost track. It still grabs me because that was mostly unscripted, okay? He knew that what they were roughly going to do, but they didn't tell him that his family was going to be at the front, yeah? And that response you saw, that was a real emotion. You know, it's almost unfair to put that on someone, but they were very clear with him that this is something we're going to try and accomplish, and he was completely accepting of that risk because he believed in what they were trying to do. But it just helps you to really understand, doesn't it, that when I say, oh yeah, is that okay? You know, somebody will wear that decision. Are you prepared to live with that? If I were to say in my position as risk manager, you know what, let's just go back to events. I just miss them so much. Could I live with the impact of that advice when it starts to flow in that one of our most eldest members of our society is now in hospital? Would I be all right with that? Oh, God, no, really wouldn't. So think carefully about this. Take this seriously. It's not a game. And when you realize that you're out of your depth and that risks are unacceptable, what do you do about it? Oh, that's not rocket science either. Here's a boring chart, and there's a dot here. I don't care about that. What I want you to focus on is here's risk level, so risk is going up, and here's cost and benefit along the bottom, yeah? And what you can see is that as with high risk, there's often little input to affect a lot of change. And with low risk, there's often a lot of effort to affect change. There's a little happy medium, which is called as low as reasonably practicable, a LARP. And I'm not strictly for this. Zero harm says just go all the way, just drop every single resource into it. But there is some balance to be struck. And that balance is best described by the words reasonably practicable. So it's okay to have a risk as long as, underscore, bold, highlight, as long as we believe we have managed it so far as what would be considered reasonable. And the obvious question you're going to ask is, oh, Jip, how do I know if it's reasonable? Talk to people. Ask other people, do you think it's reasonable? And get that average. Don't rely on one or two subjectives. Get 20 people polled and say, no, everyone agrees with me. So I think I'm being reasonable. All right. I can't believe I've managed to fit that into the time as well as I have. That is incredible. A little bit of self-congratulations here. Okay, so where to from here? All right, well, I hope you can see that risk management isn't scary, and it's also not impossible because we're already doing it. But we aren't probably doing it enough. That would be my perspective, and hey, I've got a vested interest in this, but I hope you might feel the same way too after that presentation. I think risk management's pretty helpful, actually. And when I wrote these dot points, it just reminded me of something. I wonder if anyone remembers this campaign. What a classic. So where the bloody hell are ya? I wonder if anyone knows who was the one that penned this campaign. Chuck it in the chat if you know who it is. Very, very involved. I don't know how involved, but very involved. Give you a minute. You definitely know this person, all right? Even, hey, Sawley's got it. This is Morrison's campaign. What a ripper. And it was a disaster. It was a shocker. It got a lot of attention. So, you know, to those that think that any attention's good attention, it was a success. But a lot of people pushed back on it and went, this is not representative of Australia. This is kind of fake and ugly and yuck. Try again. So risk management, you know, and you know, thinking about things like the social media presence stuff, risk management is really everywhere around us, and we have to be much more conscious of it, I think, to be a much better organization. So in conclusion, why don't you come talk to me? That's my role with your respective offices. Come and have a chat about risks in your office and say, hey, Jim, after your presentation, I'm really thinking about the look and feel of my articles out to my populace. And I just don't know if it's a bit like, where the bloody hell are you? And I'm going to say, oh, comms, not my strength. Bridget, she's amazing, right? And we'll link you in. We'll have a chat about that. But I also want to get a little bit better at just recognizing all these different risks and how they're flowing. So that really brings to a conclusion my presentation. I did have one special request though in the last moments. I have something for you. I'm going to get that one right. Here we are. Oh, no, I've done it wrong. That one. Here we are. Copy. Everyone, paste. All right, there's a Google form. Again, this is actually something I developed quite a while ago, and it's just sat in my to-do list while I've argued about, you know, hey, can we just start with a policy so that we at least got a reason to be doing this? But that's a little set of questions I came up with. I think it was 2017. It might have even been 2016. So none of you would have seen that now, or at least not in your current role. But I did poll the Kingdom officers and I just asked them about risk. And what I got back from those that responded was very powerful. It helped me to construct that register of threats that you saw. So if it's not too much to ask, it'd be great if you could go and you can pass it around to any officer, by the way, send it out. I might even, after this, put it out through our various Facebook chats and stuff. But I just want to get a bit of a better perspective of where things are at now. And I'd kind of like to do it again post-pandemic and see how it's changed. But I know it's a lot to ask. So, you know, give me what you've got. And if it's too much, that's fine. Anyway, conscious of the time, questions. Some evil person put my sessions back to back, which is just brutal. So now I have to go and think about the next presentation. But any questions? None. I mean, I was reading the log as we went, keeping half an eye. If I didn't sort of work any of your statements into my presentation, now's a good time to go, oh, Jib, I just asked you a question earlier and I'm just interested in a formal response. Now's a good time. Just reading back. Wow, no questions. Oh, here we go. Yeah, good point, Ashkeen. Let's make sure that we get all of that chat recorded as well. That's a great idea. And I'll go through it and sort of look at it more closely. You can unmute now. Don't be shy. I'm not scared about the time.
Yes, you are.
What the hell?
That was really interesting to listen to while I was driving along. I'm really glad I came along to this one. A lot of that stuff actually reminded me of the presentations they give at my work, being that I work in infectious diseases. So that was actually really good.
Yeah, this presentation challenged me. I'm not going to lie, because I'm used to delivering this information into what I would call an established culture. What I mean by that is something that's matured. All the pieces are already there, and I'm just showing them around. Hey, have a look in here. There's an incident process. Hey, look over here. Here's how we audit. When I wrote this, a number of times I got completely sidetracked because I suddenly went, oh, we don't have that. and that's actually pretty important. So I have a whole to-do list in the background, which I have been kind of quietly waiting to step down as Baron to get on with. But yeah, a lot of the experiences from work are coming through here. And it's probably okay to feel a bit intimidated by that, but we're not a workplace, Jib, like, whoa, steady on. But I just sort of look at it and think, if it's good enough for people to want to pay for it, why don't we aim to try and do that for free and at least leverage off the experience and wisdom of those groups that have really done the hard yards.
Even if we look at it from the point of view, we reduce the opportunity for someone to injure themselves and bad publicity, I think that's a good reason to head down this path. But then again, the same as Asheen, I've dealt with this through work for a very long time, given I work in a scientific laboratory setting, and, you know, the risks of doing stuff that you shouldn't increase drastically when you're playing with chemicals.